Cyber risk management in 2024 is all about how to strengthen your operational resilience by automating oversight of emerging gaps in your cyber controls, covering staff, systems, and of course, crucially, your suppliers. But getting a grip on those cyber controls is difficult. You may think you need to hire experts in the field to work for you full time. That's certainly helpful, but hiring is hard, especially of expensive cybersecurity experts. In the UK alone, the number of unfilled cyber jobs grew by 29% in the last year, and around the world, including the figures I'm showing on the screen in the US, people with advanced cyber resilience and cyber security skills are expensive to hire, which is why hundreds of firms work with Cyber Rescue as their trusted advisor to help you to build and strengthen your operational resilience by strengthening your capability to challenge and engage the first line of cybersecurity. The hundreds of firms that we help benefit from a monthly call where we give practical advice of the kind I will go through today. I'm going to give 3 examples of the best ways to reduce cyber risk. For example, cooperating with your cyber insurers, automating the continuous and external monitoring of your cyber risk controls, and thirdly, how to demonstrate the completeness of the risk controls you have to your key stakeholders. Now, these 3 pieces of advice are absolutely crucial because cyber is a very real and very present danger. Showing on the screen now are breaches that we have anticipated, for example, in Australia, where 40% of the Australians' maritime ports have been closed due to a cyber attack on the leading operator DP World. And again, just in the last week, the world's top bank by assets, ICBC, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, with over $4 trillion worth of assets, wasn't able to trade in New York, again because of a cyber attack. Other financial organisations like Mr. Cooper and other crucial suppliers like Jen, the owner of Norton Antivirus, have also been breached recently, and we help senior leaders like yourselves to anticipate which of your suppliers, your subsidiaries or your systems are most likely to be breached, as can be shown by the blue line that anticipated each of those red stars where a breach happened in the last few days. Now, fortunately, not every organisation is breached every day, week, month or year, largely thanks to your excellent efforts in governance, risk and compliance, as well as operational resilience. The way that information security management systems are overseen by senior governance, risk and compliance professionals now has certainly improved, and efforts to introduce business impact analysis to look at the most important business services and focusing cyber strategy on protecting those has definitely helped to reduce risk in many organisations. And last year, 2022, was a good year for defenders. Many companies improved their cyber maturity. They became faster, for example, in detecting and then mitigating breaches. But unfortunately, the year we're just coming to the end of now, 2023, has been a good year for attackers. We've seen ransomware successes that have been publicly visible, publicly announced, have grown by 150% compared to last year. And even worse than that, particularly as large organisations have paid large ransoms. You can see in the picture on the right that while the median payment is still only $200,000, the typical or most frequent level of payment, but the average, pulled up by a few outlying very large payments, the average ransom payment is now over $750,000. And that, of course, is just the payment part of the cost for any firm that is hit by ransomware. That good year for attackers in general also suggests recent data that 2024 may be a particularly tough year for the finance sector. You can see on the left how in the last 3 months, Q3 of 2023, there have been a particularly large number of publicly visible breaches of financial firms in the USA. And on the right-hand side, you can see that this year, banks, insurers and other financial firms have been particularly likely to have been hit by a breach at one of their suppliers. So in that context, there are 3 items that chief risk officers, heads of operational resilience, as well as their CISOs should have on the risk radar for the coming years. At the end of 2023, we're definitely seeing a resurgence of ransomware, particularly via third parties and suppliers, as Russian language criminals that were distracted in 2022 by the invasion of Ukraine have reorganized their business models, re-energized using new automations, but also new business models that particularly put your third parties, your suppliers, at risk. For 2024, we'll see a continuing acceleration of attacks, for example, enhanced by generative AI. And that will mean not just the speed, not just the sophistication, but also the scale of phishing attacks, malware coding, and deep fakes is likely to explode. And looking further ahead, for 2028, experts in quantum computing anticipate that the encryption that many organizations have used for many years will reach its natural end of life. The end of life of legacy encryption means that data that you may have stored, encrypted with the traditional 128-bit encryption protocols will now be available for criminals to unencrypt and exploit. So 2028 is still 5 years away. Focusing on the first 2 of those, third-party risk management and artificial intelligence, we're already seeing in the graph on the left from the experts at Resilience who looked at cyber insurance claims worldwide that breaches at vendors, your third-party risks, has shot up the rankings and is now the top cause of cyber insurance payouts to firms like yours that have been harmed by a breach at one of their vendors. And on the artificial intelligence side, there are now hundreds of generative AI applications, many of which you will have heard of, but increasingly those specifically dedicated to dark web operators that are allowing bad actors to master and exploit artificial intelligence faster than IT pros. The bad actors don't have a governance committee they need to report to. They can literally move fast and break things. So the 3 lines of defense that is considered best practice at most firms needs to strengthen in all areas. The first line of defense, of course, the frontline staff, the cybersecurity professionals that you deploy to implement controls specified in the frameworks you've chosen to manage your risk. Those are challenging controls to implement, and as you can see on the graph, there are a surprising number of layers, let alone individual controls that should be implemented. But at the center of this picture, the mission critical assets, when you're challenging your first line staff, I would encourage you to focus on helping them to protect that most critical of assets, the identity of your staff who can access your applications, your data, your crown jewels. Protecting the identity of your staff with identity and access management solutions, making sure that multi-factor authentication is there to ensure that if their password is breached, their full identity won't necessarily be so, is absolutely crucial for the months and years ahead. The second line of defence that provides assurance that the first line is working effectively, typically called risk or compliance, operational resilience. Those teams are not fighting day to day in the trenches on the individual controls, but they're identifying gaps as they emerge in those controls. It's your job to select a control framework and provide timely and effective challenge where gaps emerge between the protections you've implemented and the best practice defined in the control you've chosen. The best practice in this area, the second line of defence now, is to have a daily external dashboard of the gaps in the necessary controls, the required controls you've chosen for your control framework. It's a bit like in the finance area, mark to market, external validation that the traders who are creating opportunity, working in their environments, but also taking on risks, similar to your digital technology teams creating opportunity, but also potentially facing risks. You have a daily external dashboard to tell you how well in the second line you're able to challenge risk in the first line. And it's interesting to me that in 2024 we'll see the rollout of a new version of the control framework that many of your cyber colleagues love most, the NIST cyber framework, sometimes called the 5 pillars, to identify your assets, protect them, detect when they're being attacked, respond when a hacker breaks through, and then recover from the damage that attacker who got through may cause. I'm delighted that the National Institute of Science and Technology in the US, that sets standards for many, many things around the world, has added a 6th pillar to recognise the important governance work of the second line leaders, chief risk officers, heads of operational resilience, to ensure that you are properly defining the organisational context, the risk management strategy, the roles and responsibilities, as well as policies and procedures that have an overarching governance capability to implement cyber risk management effectively. So as you're implementing your chosen framework, such as NIST, you'll also have backing you up behind you your third line of defence, the audit function, that also is being challenged to improve how they assess and assure particularly external stakeholders such as regulators or shareholders that you have an effective first and second line of defence. And we're finding that auditors are quite rightly focusing on the greatest risks, as well as the controls that cyber insurers and others have proven over the last couple of years financially give you the best protections, looking at things like multi-factor authentication, identity and access management, and third-party risk management. Auditors should be checking that you are properly implementing controls in those areas. So across the 3 lines of defence, we're seeing going into 2024 that the first line is improving by taking those controls and implementing them by design into the systems that are used. Cyber security by design. In particular, there's a focus on identity and access management, delivering explicit verification. Is this person accessing the systems really the person, the employee that is entitled to access it? Have we made sure that that employee only has access to the things they really need to? They have the least privilege access level that they need for doing their job. And to assume that there are bad actors in the systems, assume that some of your systems have been breached. Putting that together, cybersecurity by design, a great way of implementing that, at least theoretically, is called zero trust. You should engage your first line to ask them about how challenging they're finding implementing zero trust, how they're trying to implement cybersecurity by design, how they're aligning all their work with your preferred control framework. And in the second line, to automate assurance that compliance with your chosen framework is being maintained. And rather than asking the first line to be their own judge, jury, and executioner, you should have your own daily dashboard of external monitoring of the cyber controls required by the cyber framework you've selected. Ideally, that daily dashboard will give you a breach probability across your systems, subsidiaries, and crucially your suppliers. All the suppliers used by all your staff, not just the suppliers used by your IT department. So in best practice, you will know who the legal team are working with, who the marketing team are using, how the HR department has outsourced recruitment and maybe even payroll to other companies, and have a breach probability for each of those suppliers, understanding the harm that it could do if the controls that they've promised you contractually to implement to protect your data and systems were ever to be breached. And of course, behind that, as I mentioned, the third line, the auditors work with them to ensure that they're auditing, whether it's internal audits or external, make sure they're challenging you on areas such as multi-factor authentication, identity and access management, and third-party risk management today, so that you can prepare for a future where generative AI and even quantum decryption of the data you thought you'd secured could be decrypted in the future. So that's the context in which you need to be taking practical actions today for the challenges of the year ahead. And as I promised, I'm going to dive into 3 areas. Firstly, cooperating with your cyber insurers. Of course, you talk to them about transferring risk, but paying a premium so that at least some of your costs will be covered by the insurer, transferring risk. We have a lot more information we can provide you about how best to engage on the detail of your cyber insurance contract if that's useful. But what you should also be doing is engaging in a constructive conversation to learn what they consider to be the best cyber controls against the worst new cyber threats. So the insurers know what it is that drives cost to firms like you, their customers, when you're breached. Indeed, they've climbed a mountain of knowledge over the last 18 months, catching up with the losses that many of them made back in 2021 as ransomware exploded, having to raise their prices by 4%, 7%, 25% just in a quarter, 34% in the peak quarter, so doubling their prices in a year. But that has largely been overcome. Prices are at a level where insurers can still make a little bit of money, and fewer firms are now seeing dramatic cost increases when they go to reinsure. But they're often finding a change in their cyber insurance when they go to reinsure is that they're now required to have more advanced tools and processes to prevent a major breach in the first place. And there's fantastic data available from insurers. For example, showing here from Resilience, an analysis of all cyber insurance claims, breaches at vendors now account for 29% of the costs cyber insurers pay out after a breach. In other words, when firms like yours come to them making a claim for the harm that they have suffered, in 29% of the cases it's because their data or processes were breached via a supplier. So the message clearly is you need to greatly strengthen, automate, enhance your third-party risk management. Secondly, 23% of breaches are due to phishing on the firm itself, so strengthen your multi-factor authentication. And thirdly, the breaches of what's called privileged access management. That's the special security that's provided for your IT administrators. Considerable enhancement is needed in your identity and access management for those privileged accounts in particular. So that's the first area. You've selected. Here is an example of a third-party risk dashboard looking at frameworks of NIST and ISO, which have 108 controls in the NIST case, 115 in ISO, and gathering data, external data, on 36 of those controls in the ISO 27000 case, and identifying conflicts, in this case 2 conflicts, where we can see, for example, this particular supplier has publicly visible test data that could well include historic, actual, real customer data that's visible externally. These kind of automations are now very, very powerful and can be used to anticipate the probability of a breach. Again, in each of these 4 diagrams, you're seeing the logo of a firm that suffered a major breach, but the red star is always anticipated by the blue line showing the score, the cybersecurity posture score of that firm, compared to half a dozen very similar firms that you could choose as an alternative third party if it's the head of risk or of head of operational resilience. You've got the daily dashboards that tell you where those risks are. The third area that we recommend to take action on over the coming days is to ensure that you can demonstrate the completeness of risk controls to your stakeholders. And what we're increasingly finding is that chief risk officers have a complete view, maybe even a detailed view, of a very narrow set of their cyber risks. They don't have a full register of their key assets. They don't know who all their suppliers are, even, shockingly, of important business services. But it's now possible to identify suppliers automatically, looking at everything from published job adverts and published CVs, which can be gathered in huge quantities, looking at the digital connections between your firm and your suppliers, the data that is publicly visible going backwards and forwards, the APIs, the application interfaces that are visible where your computers talk to your suppliers. All of that is now possible to automate, which is just in time because of the developments we're seeing in an expanding use by staff of new software applications. That's being driven in particular by the power of artificial intelligence. What we're seeing is that your staff are naturally already using artificial intelligence to explore how they can do their job better, more effectively. They want to do a good job for you. And some firms have implemented clear guidance. The firms that have defined, clear guidance as of October 2023. Interestingly, 72%, almost 3/4, have said we don't let our staff use artificial intelligence. Point blank. Simple rule for now. We'll refine it later on. 28% say yes, we do officially permit the use of AI, often with specific advice on how to use it and guidance on which AI apps, which generative AI apps are trustworthy. But the message hasn't got through to most staff. A survey of over 2,000 IT professionals found that 1/4 of them understand that they are allowed to use AI. 1/3 are not sure, but 41% use AI regardless. And those AI-powered apps are going to change how corporations get things done. Over the last few years, we have, of course, seen corporations moving from having services run in the basement on their own computers to having them delivered via the cloud, via the internet, onto their staff's laptops. Firms like Microsoft, of course, and Google, but also Salesforce and Zoom are well known. Many corporations buy those applications for all of their staff. What you may not be so familiar with is the number of apps that your development IT team and even your security team are using. You might have heard of GitHub, the repositories. You might have heard of AWS being spun up to deliver new capability, or Okta to manage identity and access. But again, all of those apps are, or should be, controlled centrally. But increasingly we're finding that staff are signing up individually to apps, increasingly artificial intelligence powered apps, that an individual member of staff or a supervisor, the leader of a department, can sign up for. And with the explosion of generative AI apps, you're going to find your interns loading up your company secrets. You're going to find your marketing department wasting money signing up for applications that have already been bought from another supplier via corporates. The second line of defence, the Chief Risk Officer, the Head of Operational Resilience, needs to know the applications that are being used, because your assets, your core information, the identities of your staff, the passwords they use are being put into this explosion of apps that are available at the touch of a careless finger. So again, you should be thinking about what are the dashboards that your first line, but also the second line have to easily measure and monitor this risk from the explosion of unsanctioned applications, to be able to put a figure on the risk of identities, applications or information being breached via these generative AI apps that so many of your staff are going to use in the coming year. So pulling that all together again, actions we would love to support you taking in the coming weeks and months: how to cooperate with your cyber insurers, how to automate continuous and external monitoring of risk controls, and crucially, to demonstrate the completeness of risk controls to all your stakeholders, because those controls need to apply to all your key assets across your staff, your systems, your subsidiaries, and crucially your suppliers of all important business services. So we'd love it if you reach out to us to come as an operational resilience expert, to have some of this support on a complimentary basis for 3 months. It costs £20,000 a year, but we'll give you £5,000 worth for free. We have lots of detailed advice All you need to do is send an email with the word free in the subject line to assistance@cyberrescue.co.uk for your 3 months of complimentary director level support. I look forward to seeing your email. Send it now, just the word free in the subject line to assistance@cyberrescue.co.uk. Stay safe.